From the sparkling kitchens of 1950s suburbia to the modern-day resurgence of traditional values, the image of the ideal housewife has undergone fascinating transformations. Today we're diving into the world of the 1950s housewives and the 2020s Tradwife movement, comparing their roles, challenges, and what draws women to these lifestyles. Are they a return to the past or a new take on femininity? Hello everyone, before we dive into today's video, I want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, Craftsy, my go-to online resource for all things creative and DIY. Craftsy is an incredible online community where millions of makers and enthusiasts come together to learn, get inspired, and master new skills. Imagine over 2,000 classes led by amazing award-winning instructors that cover everything from knitting, crochet, quilting, sewing, painting, baking, and more. I recently took on a few of their knitting and baking classes and I'm blown away by how easy and fun they make it to follow along. Each lesson is designed to be super accessible, whether you're a beginner or have been crafting for years. Plus, Craftsy adds new classes all the time, so there's always something fresh to learn. At Craftsy, you'll find classes led by talented instructors who share their professional tips, walking you through each technique step by step. And one of the best parts, Craftsy lets you learn at your own pace, watch on your own time, and even download resources for later. And for a limited time, Craftsy has an awesome Black Friday deal. The first 1,000 of you who click the link in my description will get a full year of premium membership at Craftsy for just $1.49. Yup, that's access to thousands of classes and projects for only $1.49. But hurry, because this offer is for new members only, so grab your spot now. So if you're ready to join a community that celebrates creativity, click the link below and join me and thousands of others of makers on Craftsy. And now let's jump back into the main video. Chapter 1, the ideal 1950s housewife. Let's start with the quintessential 1950s housewife. Picture this, a perfectly coiffed woman, apron tied around her waist, standing in her gleaming kitchen with the scent of a roast in the oven. The 1950s housewife was often portrayed as the epitome of feminine grace and domesticity. Her role was deeply tied to homemaking, cleaning, cooking, raising children, and ensuring her home was a sanctuary for her hard-working husband. Her day typically started early, often before dawn, with breakfast prepared and a packed lunch ready for her husband to take to work. After seeing him off, she would begin her daily chores, including tidying the house, doing laundry, and planning meals. These tasks weren't just seen as duties, they were part of a larger social expectation to create a perfect, harmonious household. The 1950s home was a reflection of the woman who ran it. Advertising in the 1950s played a crucial role in reinforcing this ideal. Women were constantly marketed to as the primary users of household appliances, beauty products, and cleaning supplies. The image of a good wife was often tied to how well she could manage her home. Efficiency was key, and new gadgets like electric mixers, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines promised to help her achieve domestic perfection with ease. These advertisements weren't just about convenience. They communicated a deeper message that a woman's value was closely tied to her ability to maintain a perfect home. Products were designed and marketed to ensure that the modern housewife could do it all and still look polished and glamorous while doing it. Television shows of the era, like Leave It to Beaver and The Donna Reed Show, reinforced the image further. The housewife, who was shown as calm, composed, and always cheerful, handling every challenge with grace. Her husband, the breadwinner, relied on her to create a peaceful, well-managed home to retreat to after a long day of work. In addition to her domestic responsibilities, a 1950s housewife was also expected to maintain her appearance. Looking presentable for her husband's return home was seen as a sign of respect and care. Magazines at the time were filled with beauty advice, emphasizing the importance of keeping up appearances even in the privacy of the home. Her role was not just about cooking or cleaning, it was about embodying the perfect woman, wife, and mother. The 1950s ideal was more than just a role, it was a lifestyle. Women were expected to exude charm, beauty, and poise, but both at home and in social settings. The perfect housewife wasn't just good at running a home, she was a symbol of her family's success and prosperity. But this image of the content, dedicated housewife often masked the reality many women faced. Despite the glossy exterior, many women felt trapped in the role. Society had placed them in a box, defining their worth by their ability to maintain a household and raise children. The satisfaction that came from homemaking was often overshadowed by feelings of isolation, boredom, and a lack of fulfillment beyond the confines of the home. Betty Friedan captured this discontent in her groundbreaking book, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963. She called it the problem that had no name, the widespread unhappiness experienced by many housewives who, despite living in material comfort, felt a deep sense of unfulfillment. Friedan's work became a catalyst for the second wave feminist movement, sparking conversations about the limitations of these rigid gender roles and the need for broader opportunities for women. As the feminist movement gained momentum in the 1960s and beyond, the role of this housewife began to shift. Women started to question whether this traditional model of domesticity was truly fulfilling and whether it allowed them the freedom to pursue their own passions and careers. For many, the image of the 1950s housewife remains iconic, a symbol of a simpler, more structured time, but for the women who lived it, the lifestyle was often far more complex. It was a life full of demands, both external and internal, where a woman's identity was largely defined by her home and family. And for some, the weight of the expectations proved overwhelming. Chapter 2. Enter the 2020s Tradwife movement. Fast forward to the 2020s, and we see the emergence of a growing online movement known as Tradwives. These women embrace traditional gender roles, often citing a return to femininity, homemaking, and submission to their husbands as rejection of modern feminism. But this movement isn't a direct replica of the 1950s. It's a new form of self-expression, fueled by the reach and influence of social media. Tradwives draw inspiration from a romanticized version of a 1950s housewife, but their approach is distinctly modern. Thanks to platforms like YouTube and Instagram, as well as TikTok, this movement has become a global phenomenon, with women posting their homemaking tips, family values, and dedication to being feminine wives. They emphasize traditional roles as a deliberate lifestyle choice, in contrast to second-wave feminism, which prioritized career-driven independence. For many of these women, the Tradwife lifestyle is about embracing what they see as the natural roles of men and women. They argue that feminism's focus on career advancement and breaking down gender roles have left many women feeling overburdened, disconnected from their families, and unsatisfied with their lives. The Tradwife movement is often presented as an antidote to these stresses, promoting a simpler, slower-paced life that revolves around the home, family, and personal well-being. Self-care and embracing femininity are also key components of the Tradwife movement. Many Tradwives emphasize the importance of taking care of their appearance, not just for their husbands, but for themselves. The aesthetic is often vintage-inspired, with Tradwives wearing modest dresses, soft makeup, and hairstyles reminiscent of the 50s, further reinforcing the connection between the lifestyle and the bygone era. In addition to the outward appearance, many Tradwives take pride in mastering traditional homemaking skills like cooking from scratch, sewing, and gardening. The movement is filled with tutorials on how to bake the perfect sourdough bread, grow your own vegetables, and even make handmade household products like soaps and candles. There's a sense of nostalgia for a time where homecraft was viewed as an essential skill set rather than a hobby. However, the Tradwife movement isn't without controversy. Critics argue that it perpetuates outdated patriarchal values, glamorizing a time when women's roles were restricted to the domestic sphere. They point out that many Tradwives advocate for submission to their husbands, a concept that feminist movements have long fought against. The fear critics say is that by romanticizing the past, the movement ignores the inequalities and limitations women faced during that era. And supporters of the Tradwife lifestyle, however, are quick to defend their choices. They argue that the key differences between the 50s housewife and the modern Tradwife is choice. Where 1950s women were often pressured into domestic roles by the societal norms, modern Tradwives insist they are choosing this path on their own and free will, which is true. If they choose to do this and they're happy, then by all means. It's not like everyone is forced to do this. And for them, being a homemaker is a form of empowerment that allows them to prioritize family, create a nurturing environment, and reconnect with what they see as natural feminine virtues. And many Tradwives also see their lifestyles as a response to the pressures of modern feminism, which they argue pushes women to have it all: careers, family, social lives, leaving them overwhelmed and exhausted. It is true. Now you're expected to do everything, like all the 1950s stuff, plus working, plus, you know what I mean? By opting out of the workforce and embracing a home-centered life, they feel they've reclaimed their sense of balance and control. I think a lot of people couldn't even afford to be a trad wife because you need two incomes nowadays just to survive, because the cost of living is so much compared to what it was in the 1950s. Like a normal person could buy a house, and now here in Canada, you have to make over like $250,000 a year to buy a house. So it's like unattainable for most people to even have some sort of like idealized like Tradwife lifestyle. So it's an elitist thing. And to these women, the idea of submission is not about oppression, it's about partnership. Tradwives often talk about their husbands as leaders of the household, but emphasize their roles are equally important. Submission in the context is framed as a choice that reflects traditional values of respect and cooperation within the marriage. This, they argue, is not about giving up power, but about embracing a complementary role and strengthens the family unit. The Tradwife movement has also formed tight-knit communities, both online and offline. And these women find support from one another in their choice to embrace domesticity, sharing advice on everything from parenting and homeschooling to maintain strong marriages. They find solidarity in rejecting the hustle culture of modern life, preferring to focus on what they see as simple, more fulfilling aspects of womanhood. But despite the criticisms and controversies surrounding the Tradwife lifestyle, one thing is clear: this movement has struck a chord with a growing number of women who feel the modern society's expectations for women are unsustainable. For some, the appeal of slowing down, focusing on family, and returning to traditional roles represents a path to happiness and fulfillment that modern feminism, in their view, can't offer. Chapter 3: Comparing the roles, then versus now. Though both 1950s housewives and 2020 Tradwives place a strong emphasis on homemaking and domesticity, the key difference lies in the context of their roles. The 1950s housewife didn't have much choice. Her role was largely prescribed by societal expectations. Women were encouraged, even pressured, to become homemakers, and any deviation from this norm was met with judgment. For many, leaving the role of a housewife came with significant social stigma and the fear of being seen as neglecting their duties to the family. In the 1950s, women were expected to marry young, start families, and dedicate themselves to creating an ideal home environment. Career opportunities were limited, and women who chose to work outside the home were often criticized or seen as neglectful mothers. Social norms reinforced the idea that a woman's place was in the home, taking care of her family while the husband provided for them financially. The idea of being a good wife was strongly linked to the domestic sphere, and any dissatisfaction with this role was often dismissed or ignored. The emotional and psychological strain of maintaining this image left many women feeling trapped, with few outlets for self-expression beyond their homes. Their lives were deeply defined by a narrow set of gender expectations, and leaving the domestic role was often unthinkable for most. By contrast, many modern-day Tradwives argue that they have deliberately chosen this lifestyle, positioning it as a countercultural response to the overwhelming pressures of modern feminism and careerism. Tradwives often highlight the benefits of slowing down, focusing on family, and embracing femininity, rather than feeling pressured to do do it all. For them, homemaking isn't a societal obligation. It's a personal decision driven by desire for balance and fulfillment. Unlike their 1950s counterparts, who were frequently confined by social norms, today's Tradwives often choose to be homemakers as a form of empowerment. They reject the notion that modern feminism's emphasis on independence and career advancement should be the only path for a woman. Instead, they find meaning in cultivating a nurturing home environment and argue that their domestic role allows them to prioritize family and well-being without the pressure to compete in the workforce. And today's Tradwives also benefit from the power of community and connection through social media. Where the 1950s housewife may have felt isolated in her role, modern Tradwives have access to extensive online networks of like-minded women. This digital community offers support and advice and validation, helping them navigate homemaking, marriage, and parenting with a sense of solidarity that didn't exist for their mid-century counterparts. Another significant difference is the perception of labor. The 1950s housewife was expected to take on all household duties without question, and there was little recognition for the work she did. It was considered her duty. Tradwives today, however, view homemaking as a personal craft, something they take pride in, and often something that can be monetized through content creation. Many Tradwives document their daily routine on blogs, YouTube channels, and Instagram, as well as TikTok, transforming homemaking into a form of self-expression and a business. It's true, if they have a big following, it's a lot of work, and they're clearly monetizing too, so it's definitely a business in its own. So social media allows modern Tradwives not only to share their lifestyle, but also monetize these skills. Many Tradwives have built successful personal brands by offering tutorials and everything from meal prepping, DIY household products, to traditional beauty routines and marriage advice. Their work in the home is not just a private duty, it's something they can display for the world to be rewarded for financially and socially. So at its core, the Tradwife movement represents a different kind of domestic power. While both 1950s housewives and modern Tradwives emphasize the importance of family and home, Tradwives are often more intentional in how they frame their choices. The Tradwife's role is not just about fulfilling societal expectations, but about reclaiming and reinterpreting what domesticity means in a modern context. They see themselves as reclaiming femininity and traditional values, offering a contrast to what they view as the chaos and disconnect of modern life. I mean, it is true, and I wish most people had more time to cook more meals at home and stuff. That's why people are so unhealthy nowadays, because everyone's opting for fast food and everything's fast and on the go. Still, the movement is not without critics. While the 1950s housewives had little choice but to conform, modern Tradwives face criticism for romanticizing a time when women's rights were far more restricted. Feminists argue that while their lifestyle may seem liberating for some, it can still reinforce limiting gender roles that prioritize women's work in their home over other forms of achievement. Chapter 4. The role of technology and social media. One of the most striking differences between the 1950s housewife and today's Tradwife is technology. In the 50s, the ideal housewife lived largely isolated existence, confined to her suburban home, with her social circles limited to neighbors and a small community of groups. Communication was primarily face-to-face, and homemaking skills or knowledge had to be passed down through family, books, or word of mouth. The 1950s housewife had limited exposure to broader communities, and her primary source of information came from magazines, television shows, or her immediate social circle. The lifestyle was relatively uniform, dictated by societal norms and expectations that emphasize a clean, well-kept home and dutiful service to one's family. There was little room for variation or creative self-expression beyond what was deemed appropriate for a housewife. Fast forward to the 2020s, and Tradwives have access to a global network of like-minded women on social media. The digital landscape has revolutionized the way women share their experiences, connect with others, and build communities. And through the social media, the Tradwives can document their daily routines, from the cooking, the homemaking, the decorating, the homeschooling, and curating a feminine appearance inspired by vintage styles. What was once a private, often isolating experience of homemaking has now become a public communal activity. And these Tradwives share their personal journeys, they offer advice and tips and encouragement, and the online presence creates a sense of belonging and empowerment. And for many, social media offers a validation and recognition that the 1950s housewife could have never experienced. It's no longer about running the household, it's about sharing the art of homemaking. I mean, essentially, it's just having your own business and social media presence. So, I mean, they're quite different in many ways. Beyond Beyond community building, social media has also transformed homemaking into a career path, like I mentioned earlier. And unlike the 1950s housewife who was expected to work in the home without financial compensation, today's Tradwives can monetize their lifestyle through content creation by sharing their daily routines, tips, philosophies, and many have amassed large followings and turned their experience and expertise in homemaking into a thriving business and personal brand. From sponsored content and affiliate marketing to selling courses on homemaking or creating their own product lines, many Tradwives have found ways to turn their domestic skills into income streams. Whether it's writing cookbooks, launching vintage-inspired clothing brands, or offering advice on how to cultivate traditional femininity, social media has provided modern Tradwives with a platform that their 1950s counterparts did not have. Interestingly, while Tradwives embrace traditional gender roles, the ability to monetize their homemaking efforts has given many a degree of financial independence. Because in the 50s, this is a stark contrast to the 1950s housewife, who was often entirely financially dependent on her husband. The Tradwife movement has redefined homemaking not only as a lifestyle, but a potential business model, blending old-fashioned values with modern economic opportunities. And many of these critiques focus on the highly curated and aesthetically driven nature of social media. Tradwives, like many influencers, often present an idealized version of their lifestyle with beautifully decorated homes, perfectly cooked meals, and peaceful family interactions. This picture-perfect portrayal can create unrealistic expectations both for the Tradwives themselves and for their followers, leaving little room for the messiness and unpredictability of real life. Chapter 5. Why the appeal now? So why is there a resurgence of the Tradwife lifestyle in the 2020s? For many, it's a reaction to the overwhelming demands of modern life, the rise of hustle culture, where success is measured by productivity and constant activity, and the pressures of balancing career, family, and personal well-being. Some women are choosing to step away from the rat race. The appeal of a simpler, more defined role as a homemaker has become increasingly attractive. Modern feminism has given women more opportunities than ever before, from pursuing ambitious careers to gaining financial independence. However, along these opportunities comes immense pressure. Many women feel the burden of having to do it all, to excel at work, maintain relationships, raise children, stay healthy, and still find time for self-care. This juggling act has led to a sense of burnout and a longing for a more structured, less hectic lifestyle. The appeal of the Tradwife lifestyle lies in the perceived simplicity and clarity. For those who embrace it, being a housewife offers a way to return to a more traditional set of responsibilities, centered around the home and family as well as personal well-being, without the external pressures of a demanding career. In contrast to the chaos of modern life, the Tradwife role provides a sense of purpose and focus. For many Tradwives, the routine and predictability of homemaking bring peace and fulfillment. There's a satisfaction that comes with creating a well-organized, harmonious environment, from the tangible results of the labor, whether it's a clean home or a cooked meal or a thriving garden. And for these women, homemaking is not about restriction, but about reclaiming a role that allows them to prioritize their family and personal happiness. And for some, the appeal of the Tradwife lifestyle is deeply tied to rejecting the modern-day expectations of what a successful woman should look like. And the Tradwives often speak about the freedom they feel from stepping away from the corporate ladder, rejecting the constant push for productivity and success defined by external achievements. Instead, they focus on creating a life that aligns with their values. In a world where constant growth and achievement are often seen as the ultimate goals, the Tradwife movement offers an alternative, a way to slow down and embrace the idea that home and family are enough. And it's about finding contentment in everyday routines and finding purpose and caring for loved ones. Chapter 6. The criticism and controversy. While some celebrate the Tradwife movement as a return to choice, femininity, and empowerment, others argue it romanticizes a past that wasn't as perfect as it seems. For critics, the idea of returning to traditional roles is problematic, as the 1950s housewife model often contributed to systemic gender inequalities. These critics point out that while the image of the happy, content homemaker was plastered across media and advertisements, the reality of many women was far from ideal. The 1950s housewife was often expected to sacrifice her career aspirations, personal ambitions, and autonomy in favor of serving her husband and children. Feminists argue that the Tradwife movement, by glorifying this model, ignores the struggles many women face behind the facade of the perfect home. It It downplays the emotional labor, isolation, and dissatisfaction that many housewives experience. For critics, the Tradwife lifestyle selectively remembers the nostalgia of the past while ignoring the social and cultural restrictions that came with it. One of the central criticisms is that the Tradwife movement glamorizes submission to husbands and the subservient aspects of traditional marriage. Tradwives often speak about submitting to their husbands as part of a healthy, balanced relationship, but critics argue that this dynamic risks normalizing more restrictive gender roles where women's choices and independence become limited over time. Feminists fear that encouraging such ideals could set back decades of progress in gender inequality. I mean, I really don't think that, and because obviously this is a choice, this is a lifestyle, and a lot of these people are doing it as an actual business on social media. So supporters of this movement, however, counter the submission because this just isn't the same as what it was in the 1950s. Obviously back then it was a lot different and women didn't really have the same opportunities and choice as we do today, but a lot of people are choosing this, and if it's making them happy and they have a thriving business doing it, then to each their own. I'm not judging anyone who wants to be a trad wife. I mean, for the most part throughout my life, I've never necessarily even had a job that I've even really liked. If I could do like social media full time and YouTube full time, I definitely would. So I think it just depends on the person, and if people want to be a girl boss and be like a high powered lawyer, I think they should be allowed to too. I think it's all on everyone's choice. So I'm not a fan of criticizing people for doing something that makes them happy, and this is their choice. And that's the great thing about modern feminism, is everyone has their choice to do what they want and what makes them happy. Back in the 50s, you didn't have a choice. So there's a huge difference. So I don't think the Tradwives are necessarily opposing feminism. They just want the choice to not have to be a part of the hustle and take a step back and have a slower lifestyle. And I really don't think it's going to erode the process of gender equality. And I just don't think the movement's big enough to do that, where suddenly like we're stepping back, 50 years back in time. I just think people are choosing this and they have a nostalgic view of the past. And if they can afford to take a step back and do these things, I think people should be allowed to do that. So, and I'm no way criticizing the Tradwife movement. I just thought it was very interesting in its relation to the 1950s housewife and where the housewife really came from. Because I know the 1950s were kind of like the golden age of the housewife. And so chapter 7, what's next for the Tradwife? As the Tradwife movement continues to grow, it begs the question, is this just a phase or is it here to stay? I mean, I know these things come and go on social media, so it really is hard to say. While some people may see it as a step backward, others argue that it represents ultimate freedom, the ability to choose one's path, whether it's in the boardroom or the home. One thing is certain, the role of women will continue to evolve, and the balance between tradition and modernity is something we'll keep revisiting for years to come. So what do you think? Are the 2020s Tradwives just a modern take on the 50s housewife, or is there something entirely new? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out some of my other vintage videos.